Hi, I'm Chris, and welcome to the Cinder Six Singing Studio. Today we're going to talk about talent, what it means, if you have any, if you feel you're talented, and what that means for your singing and what that means for how you pursue your singing. And I'm also going to talk about one of my favorite books called Belong, where we kind of go into how we react to other people who seem to be really talented or seem to not be talented, and what all that's about. So first I'll just kind of start with where I've come from. So when I first started singing, I didn't really have talent. I didn't have any natural ability. I couldn't sing in tune at all. And I was, 11, so I had no idea that I did not have the natural ability to start singing. I didn't know any better in a sense, so I started singing, and I just loved it. I loved being part of the music. I loved expressing myself. I was fascinated. I thought it was super cool. So I did it for fun, and that is the best place to start. If you can start singing because you just enjoy it and it feels good, that's the place to start. And you are much more likely to get better because you're gonna enjoy singing more. The more you can enjoy practice, the better you will get. The more that you are deciding whether or not you're any good as a singer, and you're more paying attention to the thoughts in your head about your singing, well, the less immersive your singing experience is. And so as a result, you're kind of halfway singing and then halfway analyzing, judging, or criticizing your singing. So that's not quite as fun. So we'll get to that in a second, what to do about that in a second. But so when I first started singing, I didn't really have any natural ability. And I, over time, realized that, everyone around me, I was in high school choir, and everyone around me was like, most of them were better than I was as a singer. And so I loved music though, and so I thought, well, I want to learn everything I can about singing and about piano, and then I can compose for singers, because I loved creating stuff, creating melodies. And so I was going along with that plan, and then I had a lesson with a Juliard teacher and an Alexander Technique teacher at the same time, and my singing felt incredible. I was like, wow, I usually singing feels really tight, really uncomfortable, and this actually felt amazing. It was exhilarating. It was like flying. I just couldn't describe the experience. So realizing that, I went on a long search to see what would it be like to try to recreate this experience that I had. Those teachers helped me experience singing in a different way, but they couldn't explain how I could get there. So I couldn't really practice anything to get there. So I spent many years, worked with many different teachers, lots and lots of research, lots of studying how movement works, and I was able to recreate that experience. And then when I started reproducing that experience of singing, feeling super, super good, and actually sounding good, I was like, wow, this is really cool. That took a long time. It took a lot of research, a lot more understanding of how the voice works, of how habits work, all kinds of stuff. So in the process, I kind of rejected this idea that talent existed. I thought you just either have, good movement habits, since every sound that you produce is a movement inside your body and a movement inside, or a shape inside the mouth and throat. When someone would, first lesson, they would be singing really well, I would not say they were talented. I would say, you have, some really good habits already. That's awesome. But I would notice things, So I would notice that, some students, without really trying, when I would give them a new thing to do, that should have been hard, even for their talented selves, they would just do it. And then there were certain things that usually took a lot of singing experience to pull off, like a lot of artistry in their singing that wasn't copying the singer that they heard, and they would just kind of show up. They would have this wonderful phrasing and this like beautiful way of expressing a line, and it just kind of was out of nowhere. And so I knew I didn't really have, I knew I was still asking questions about, you know, what talent was. But then I noticed it in myself. I started singing things and knowing, sort of accidentally singing well at something that I knew normally took most singers a lot of practice to be able to do. And I hadn't worked for that. I hadn't done anything special. It just sort of showed up. And so then I realized it might be the case that everyone has talent, but we might have movement habits that disguise that. And so we don't really fully hear, and we don't really see where that person's talent shows up until we get out of the way tension habits, or you know, lack of efficiency in singing, and you know, other things like that. I've also worked with really experienced singers that started singing, and when they first started singing, they just had all of this natural ability. Things went really well. They sang for many years, and then me working with them for the first time, they're coming back because they said, I've lost my talent. I have no talent anymore. What happened? Why have I lost all my ability? And what I hear is a whole bunch of tension habits that have showed up, and they have gotten in the way of the natural ability and talent that they have. And so when you label someone as talented or untalented, you're really kind of putting them in a box that is not going to always be true. So you can have a singer that's really talented, and they can, over the years, you know, misuse their voice, or because they've never actually learned how to sing, they could sort of already sing. They have no real awareness of how they're singing. And so, because all those movements are in the dark for them, when those movements change, or when there's more tension, or they lose efficiency, or those kinds of things, then they really have no idea what's going on, and they don't have any power to change it because it was always just there. And so so that can be a pretty scary place. So both you know, subscribing to the label of talented or untalented, they both have their limitations, and there are all kinds of things that can actually get in the way of your singing. So I'll just give you some examples. So had I labeled myself as, you know, untalented and I should stop singing, well, then I wouldn't be at this place now where I can look back and I can see the hundreds of singers that I've helped, and that enjoy their voice more now, and have a different view of themselves and what's possible. And vice versa, when people began saying, "Oh, you're talented," I immediately said no, because to me, it downplayed the amount of work that I've done, and I want my work to be recognized. And if I'm talented, it really meant that that wasn't recognized anymore, and I didn't try, and it was just there. And I was like, no, that's not true. And not only that, but when people get labeled as talented, they also can often respond with a sense of performance pressure, and a fear that they're going to lose what they can do, or what they have, or they'll lose their identity, or they'll screw up a song, and now people will take away that badge of honor that they are talented. And so then they always feel like they have to prove themselves. They have to continue to prove that they're talented and fit this label that's been put on them. And so I really try to generally let go of putting labels on your voice. In addition, people use talent as a loophole to not work, to not put in the practice, or to shame themselves out of trying. So, for instance, if you take a few voice lessons and you realize how much work is ahead of you, or what kind of tension habits you have, instead of realizing that by undoing these tension habits, you will breathe better and sing better for the rest of your life. Instead of realizing that this is something that impacts you for the rest of your life in this incredibly positive way, you say, oh, I'm not talented. And so it excuses you from trying, and it excuses you from putting in the practice. So that being said, you might find that you just love underwater basket weaving more than singing, and that's okay. It's okay to say, hey, I'm just not going to pursue this interest. But let it be that. Let it be that. Not I am not good enough to do this interest. So I find it as a loophole there. And then I also find that those who walk in and tell me they're talented, I've had singers that come in and say, I have a talent for singing. I want to see where this goes. There tends to, not always, but there tends to be a lot of fear around exploring their voice and the different sounds they can make, because they feel like they have, they're going to ruin or mess up this image, this identity that they have of themselves as being a good singer. And so, in fact, when you come in to a lesson and you already, sound good and you're already singing really well, sometimes if you want to learn something new, maybe it's you want to sing in a foreign language or you want to try a different genre, you might sound worse in the beginning because your voice is actually having to learn to coordinate in a new way. It's not just doing what it can already do well. And so that can make you feel vulnerable. That can make you question, like, oh no, like I don't, this is uncomfortable. I don't feel as good about my singing. I don't feel like I'm a good enough, I'm such a good singer now. And that's, and that can be kind of scary. When you see, what do you do, of course, when you are, let's say you're in a choir or you hear someone sing and they're clearly better at singing than you are. What do you do about that? How do you respond to that? So when you find yourself comparing yourself to them and saying like, oh man, they're so good, I shouldn't even sing. Like, why am I singing? Like, obviously they're better than I am. You can change that into inspiration. And in this book, this is something that Radha Agrawal, I really hope I pronounced that right, talks about. So when you find yourself comparing your voice to someone else, you can get into a comparison and convince yourself you should never sing again. Or you can use that as inspiration and say, if that's what's possible for them, I wonder where I will show up and what, where I will shine. How fun, what would be wonderful to hear in my voice. So for instance, if Whitney Houston was really, really busy trying to sing like Joni Mitchell, she might do a phenomenal job, but we would have missed those powerful long notes that she became famous for. And so that's kind of where talent for me really shows up, is that there's certain sounds that your voice is just meant to sing. It's just its own special thing. And if we try to compare ourselves to others, we're never going to have room for that to happen, for our natural beauty and our voice to show up. And so when you find yourself comparing, instead, have inspiration. Look at that singer, enjoy that person's voice exactly as it is, and let it inspire you to treasure your voice and keep going and see what's possible. And then the next thing, and this is probably the one that I struggle with the most, is perfectionism versus gratitude. I would work so hard fixing every problem I found in my voice, every problem, everything wrong. And I would just focus on everything wrong, that I didn't notice when I improved. I didn't notice when I was making progress. And that is an overall tendency for me actually across a lot of areas in my life. So it is something I have to constantly remind myself is to measure my progress. So I would hear, a recording of myself from a few years ago, and then I would sing the same song and then I would hear the difference, and I would slow myself down and say, I definitely got better here. And so if you are always focused on what is wrong, or that's really taking all of your attention, you need to be aware of what things you need to fix in your singing. Totally. I'm not about being unrealistic or not being honest about where your voice is at or where your skills are at. But if that consumes all of your attention, you're not going to notice, and you're not going to nurture the movements that you want, the things that are showing up in your voice. And so those things may or may not stay there. They might leave, and you might never actually notice, and you might not actually improve just because you didn't notice when you were doing something really well and focusing on nurturing that. So that's a tough one for me. That's a tough one for me. Now I'll do one that I'm a little bit better with. Judgment versus curiosity. I had someone ask me, so do you ever have a student come in and you hear them sing and you just think to yourself, oh, they are just terrible? And I said, you know what? No, I don't have that thought. If I did have that thought ever showed up, I wouldn't take it very seriously. I would let it, come and go. But I don't, and it's because I'm a very, very curious person. I'm a really intensely curious person. And so I'm fascinated. I'm like, oh, cool. Like, they're doing this weird thing with their tongue that's giving them this frog-like sound. And so I just find it super interesting. So when you find yourself making judgments about your singing, see if you can flip those into a question. So, I sang that sounded like crap. Wait a minute. What about that sounded crappy? Like, what exactly? Like, what was it? Was it an exact vowel change? Was it a pitch dip? What was it that I didn't like? And really feed that curiosity. And that is less painful if you don't have labels about having to perform and be this talented person, or that you're this untalented person and you should really give up and you totally suck. And if there's a lot of the tension on there, it draws tension away from the actual movements you're supposed to be focusing on when you're singing, and the delicious feelings that you have when singing is feeling better. And of course, singing usually feels better before it sounds better anyway. So I love this book. I highly recommend it. And I actually want to help make a new space and a new community where people of all skill levels in singing can enjoy singing together in whatever capacity they're at that time. So if that's something that you're interested in, I highly recommend that you subscribe to my mailing list. You can click the link below to get there. And for voice lessons, either online or in my Austin, Texas studio, go to synergisticsinging.com/schedule a lesson. Thanks for watching.